guys, today I'm doing a pros and cons list of all of the art programs that I have used. Most of these are going to be paid programs. They range from the very expensive Adobe subscription to Procreate at $10. I'm also going to have a little bit of a special mention for Krita, only because it's a very good program, but I haven't used it for a while, so I don't have as much information. We're going to go ahead and start with the cheapest one, which is Procreate. If you already have an iPad, it's only $10 to get from the App Store. The Apple Pencil is super good as a tablet stylus. I think that it's an amazing product, and that's basically the only Apple thing that I'll ever recommend. Procreate has some amazing starter things and some really cool tools that apply to everybody, whether you're just starting or you are looking for something that's a little bit more portable. It is only available on the iPad. And one of the cons is the size and the layer count is limited by your iPad's RAM. So if you have a older version or a smaller version, you might have some limitations that you need to kind of get to know before you start. Some of my favorite things about Procreate are it's extremely portable. I used it primarily as kind of a sketchbook. The brushes are very good for drawing and for painting. The animation tools are super beginner friendly. The cost is very, very low. It has some really cool perspective and isometric tools that are incredibly easy to use, super easy to just jump right into without having to kind of watch a ton of videos. The workspace is optimized for small screens because it's only available on the iPad. It does take a lot of care to make sure that there's not a ton of menus that are taking up your drawing space. The flip side of that coin is some of the menus can be a little bit tricky to find. They have kind of nested them in a weird way, and I did need a couple of videos to get started. My very favorite tool in Procreate is the hold tool for lines and shapes. It's so convenient, and it makes really nice, clean lines without having to use a secondary ruler tool or anything like that. It basically just snaps it to a shape for you, which is awesome. So some of the cons, we talked about the size and the layer number being limited by your iPad RAM. That can get a little bit troubling if you're doing stuff with a ton of different layers, or you're trying to do things at really high resolutions. The animation tools are missing a couple of key functions for more complex work. If you're just interested in doing Instagram stickers or just kind of messing around with animation for the first time, it is frame by frame only in Procreate, but it is pretty easy to use and understand. There's no kind of interpolation, you can't really move things from frame to frame. There's no keyframing at all. You also can't set the frame length, which was sort of the most irritating thing to me. You kind of have to copy layers a bunch of times to get a frame to hold for more than whatever the little frame length you set it to is. So if you wanted it to kind of hold in one area, you have to copy those layers out and sort of artificially set your frame length. It is possible to accidentally delete your entire gallery by removing the app from your iPad. This is not something that I've heard a ton of people have had problems with, but this is something that happened to me, and I lost a couple of months worth of work, and it was really tragic. It's not stored in a cloud somewhere, so if you reinstall the app, it's just kind of all gone. So be really careful with that. Be really diligent with your backups if you're going to use Procreate. I also find the selection tools to be really clunky and hard to use. Trying to select and move things around can be really irritating. The menus for it are kind of confusing, and their resizing tools have a lot of pixelation and anti-aliasing crap that happens. Things don't scale quite the way they're supposed to. And then the last con I have is it's only available on the iPad. You can't get it on Windows. You can't get it on your Mac computer. You can't get it on a Windows tablet. You have to have an iPad, which is a little limiting. But if you already have one, then this is a good choice. Next up in price is Tool Sai. I used Tool Sai 1 and 2. during the period of time where I was working with Tool Sai. And I really, really liked a couple of things about it, but there were also a couple of things that really bothered me. For the pros, it's a one-time purchase, which is always amazing. You don't have to pay any kind of subscription or anything. The license for Tool Sai 1 transfers to Tool Sai 2. It runs very, very light for computers that have a little bit less like high-end specs and stuff like that. I ran it on a laptop with no problems. It's kind of an awesome program in that way. Like it runs just extremely, extremely light. You can get some really cool results. I know a lot of art friends and streamers that use Tool Sai exclusively. It's a very good program, and it does, as long as you spend the time to get to know it, it does its job very well. One of my biggest problems with Tool Sai is that the brushes have to be manually set up. There's really no import function, and you kind of have to find them someplace on the internet on like Tumblr or Pinterest. Like, it's kind of a weird esoteric search for brushes. The other issue that I have with Tool Sai is it's no longer being supported or updated. So it's a program that's not going to move as operating systems move on past what it will support. It's not going to be able to move past those hurdles. At some point it's going to become kind of unusable, which is really awful because it's a very cool program. With that end of support, it doesn't have any workspace accessibility modes, meaning I did tend to get eye strain really badly with Tool Sai because everything is only like a light shade of gray or white, and you can't set it to dark mode. Other than that, my only real complaints are that the UI is a little bit clunky with kind of those manual brush things, and there's kind of like not really a good shape tool. Like there's a couple of tools in there that were a little bit like hard to use. I would say this is a pretty good option for Windows users who want to use a tablet and don't have an iPad. It is a little bit pricier though, so I maybe would just wait for Clip Studio Paint to go on sale and do that one instead, because it is still getting updates and will move from operating systems with you. I don't know that I would recommend this at this point unless you have previous experience with Tool Sai and you know you like it. The next program we're going to talk about is Clip Studio Paint. This is the one that I currently use on my computer and also on my iPad. This is the Windows computer version that we're talking about specifically right now. This program has the best painting engine for brushes that I've seen. It has a lot of actual like paint motion brushes, if you guys understand what I mean by that. It's not a stamping brush, it actually acts like paint. I find the workspaces and brushes to be incredibly customizable, if a little bit confusing to find the setting that you're looking for. Once you've found it, you kind of, it's easy to find it again and to manipulate those workspaces and brushes. It just does take a little bit of go into the documentation and find it. It has some of the best watercolor and wash brushes that I've seen in any program. I would say Procreate is about on par with Clip Studio for this. And with the stock brushes, I have almost no complaints about the Clip Studio stock brushes. They have some very cool tools in there. Same with Procreate. The stock brushes that come with the set are pretty powerful in the way that you receive them. The fill tool is super intuitive and easy to use. It's highly customizable. You can do all sorts of crazy things with the fill tool. This is actually kind of what sold me on Clip Studio Paint because I do so much line art based work. I was constantly having to paint things in on Photoshop and Procreate, and the fill tool here just was the deciding factor for me. There's a gigantic community of people creating brushes and tools for Clip Studio Paint that Clip Studio has made accessible through their asset library. So there's probably thousands of free brushes for you to mess with and play with, whether it's lace and stamping brushes or people's specific like pencils and pens. There's some very cool tools out there to test out for no extra cost. One of the funnest things is just seeing what people upload every week, because they've got a popular free section and a new free section. You can basically just jump on there and download a bunch of new stuff. It's very easy to clutter your workspace though, so I would recommend kind of keeping this in check as much as possible. For Windows PC, Clip Studio Paint is a buy outright. It's a little bit pricier, but it does go on sale for a huge discount 4 times a year. Right now it's $50. When it goes on sale, it's like $25. So that actually would be technically cheaper than paying Tool Sai if you were to get it when it was on sale. The line art smoothing for brushes is set up per brush, so you can set up very specific smoothing brushes. You can easily duplicate brushes and add smoothing to those, and when you click back to it, your same settings will be there, which is phenomenal. I love that. You don't have to go into the brush settings every time like you do on Procreate and set up the smoothing. I know you can duplicate brushes in Procreate and do that same thing. I found it a little bit more annoying than it is in Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio has vector layers available, which is, you know, for graphic design, and if you want to do vector line art, those are interesting to use. It's not something I use on a daily, but we have done a video about that. The animation tools within Clip Studio are really nice. It has some hybrid tools with interpolation and movement and keyframes, as well as the same like frame by frames that Procreate and Photoshop have. I think if you're planning on or interested in making comics at all, this is probably the pick for you. This has a huge amount of comic tools that were invaluable, as well as tools that are available in the free community asset library that help with that as well, like background brushes and little like speech bubble brushes. It's all really cool. Clip Studio also has something called reference layers that is worth looking into. It's an extremely powerful tool. So for the cons, the workstation and the program itself can be intimidating to get into. It's worth the time I found. It might not be for you. If it's too intimidating, I would suggest closing a bunch of the menus that are up and just kind of opening what you need to get started and then learning new things as you go. It's missing a center snap tool like Photoshop, so when you move things around, they don't automatically snap to the center, which can be a little bit annoying if you're trying to do graphic design. The perspective tools for Clip Studio are super confusing and hard to learn. I spent days trying to figure out how to use the perspective tools in here, and it is still one of my weakest points. I did have an issue with an earlier version of Clip where it dumped my custom brushes once. Everything was backed up, so I didn't lose anything, but just make sure you're backing up your brushes or saving them to the Clip cloud if you are going to make a bunch of custom stuff. So the next one up in the pay scale is Clip Studio Paint for the iPad. It is only available for subscription right now. And I think it was like between $3 and $10 a month, depending on what version you get and how much animation time you want to be able to use in your timelines. If you pay for the higher version, you get more than 24 frames. And if you pay for the lower version, you get less than 24 frames. Everything else that I've found really is pretty similar. The web comics and like exporting of books might be a little different between the two versions. I got by with the lower version for a really long time though. Makes this program super portable, like the desktop version. It's basically identical. Because everything is customizable, you can really easily optimize it for desktop on your own, and I have a video about doing that. There's no lag really that I've seen. It's a pretty optimized app. If you get some extremely dense brushes that have like a lot of texture to them and you make them gigantic and try to fill the whole canvas, sometimes that will lag out a little bit. It's awesome to move projects seamlessly from your iPad to your PC. That's the one thing that I am completely obsessed with Clip Studio, is that I can move projects without having to save to a different file format. I can easily see on my iPad and on my PC, because I have it installed on both, which programs are which, if I've named them kind of spazzy. For the cons, even if you optimize it yourself, the workspace can be a little bit small for like a 9.7 inch iPad, which is where I started. I find it to be perfect sized for the 12.9 Pro, but I did find like the smaller iPads, it was a little bit crazy. The iPad version is subscription only like we talked about, but it is still cheaper than the Adobe one. So I think it's worth it, especially to be able to use like my favorite program with my favorite tablet stylus. That's pretty like critical. The storage is a little bit of a nightmare, but that's more an iPad problem than a Clip Studio problem. We're going to talk about it here because this is specifically Clip Studio for the iPad. I needed to use either a network drive, or for the iPad Pro, you can get a specialized SSD that can plug in through the USB-C port. Otherwise, things like Google Drive or Apple Cloud, if that's something you pay for, are good options. Trying to get things off of the iPad and onto the PC in the beginning was a little bit of a struggle for me. And the last one we're going to talk about is Photoshop. This was one of the first programs that I used after Paint Tool Sai. It's the most expensive one, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. It's the industry standard. I'm not really sure why. I just know everybody uses it. It's there's a lot of professional shops and design spaces that use it. It has like a whole suite of products that you can kind of interchange with it, like Lightroom and After Effects and Illustrator. So if you're paying for all of those products already, or you get it free from your job, or you get like a voucher or something from your workplace, it's a great place to start. I don't think that it's super amazing if you're planning on doing animation in it, painting, or you're looking to do comics, which was sort of like the three things that I was prioritizing. It does have some very cool color and adjustment effects. For photo editing, it is primarily a photo editing software that's just sort of been modded and expanded to be able to do sort of digital art on it. There's basically an endless number of brushes that you can get. It comes with hundreds just out of the box. Tons of people had made brushes and sell brushes for it because it is an industry standard, so you can basically never run out of brushes to try and use. Sometimes they can be kind of expensive though. There's a ton of tutorials and support for Photoshop. Everyone has used it in their career, and everyone has made tutorials about how to like do different kinds of things. Some of the downsides, including the extremely expensive subscription with no option to buy it outright, would be it's not really set up for painting. The brushes that are more painting style brushes are a little bit more stampy, and they tend to lag quite a bit. Like they're meant to just kind of like stamp once and not be sort of a continuous brush stroke. It's not friendly for less spicy computers, so if you were trying to run this on a laptop, don't. It's gonna be really frustrating, and you're gonna run into some issues like crashing, lagging, freezing, that kind of stuff. The smudge brush on the laptop is basically unusable. It took me forever to figure out how to blend anything in Photoshop because it's just so hard to use anything. There's almost no tools for comics unless you kind of just want to make your own boxes. There's a few tools for specialized like painting stuff, but not a ton. The brushstroke smoothing tools tend to be kind of iffy. They're not very good, and I think they were kind of added as an afterthought. There are mods that exist for that, like Lazy Nezumi, but again, you have to buy that on top of your subscription. The fill tool in Photoshop is absolute dog shit. I hate the fill tool over there. You always end up with weird stuff that you have to clean up afterward. It has the same kind of thing as Procreate, where you end up painting in stupid areas and spending a bunch of time trying to clean up your own work. It does technically have animation tools, and you can get extensions to help with the animation stuff, but it is pretty clunky, and from what I remember, only frame by frame, kind of like Procreate, but you can at least time out the frames. Overall, if you're getting it for free from your work, it's decent. If you're not, I wouldn't pay for it again. And then our special mention, Krita. I have used Krita, but it was back in like 2016, 2017, before they added a bunch of new tools, including the animation. I found it to be incredibly easy to get into and use. It has a similar feel to Clip Studio Paint, but a little less confusing, and it is also free. You can support the dev team by buying it through Steam or through donation if you'd like to. And I think there's starting to become a community of people building brushes for Krita, but not as many as Clip Studio Paint or Photoshop. Highly recommend if you just got a tablet and you're not looking to spend a ton of money on anything right now. Krita is a really good option to start out on. I hope that was some good information for you guys, and you can kind of take some of that away from my experience. If you have any specific questions, please put those in the comments. I'll answer those as they come in, and I'm happy to talk through any other drawing program stuff you guys have questions on. If you like this content and you're looking for more, check out my recent video on redrawing one of my favorite sticker designs and redrawing my first digital art piece. You can support the channel by subscribing, liking, and commenting on this video. You can also support me and my projects over on Patreon. These videos are brought to you by my amazing patrons: Jesse C., Anthony Jutz, Tara Billie Jean, and Tuna. Thank you guys so much for your support. Thank you guys for watching all the way to the very end, and we'll see you next time.